Hi, this is Margaret Byrd and welcome to Color Quest. And welcome back to a few weeks of videos where we have been looking at the wonderful CSA kits that I received from the Color Farm. The Color Farm is a place that has been incredibly special to me over the last few years, and sadly, they are retiring. So I am cherishing these boxes that I received from last year's harvest. We've looked at marigold as well as sulfur cosmos as the dried flower in the kits, and the wonderful artists who also did some dye work and included in those same kits a finished wool skein dyed in Dyer's chamomile, which we looked at last year, and more recently fresh leaf indigo by yours truly, and last week's gorgeous ombre wool skein of black hollyhock and locally foraged yarrow. This week we're going to finish out those kits with a special surprise in the way of a confetti effect on the finished wool skein, and the dye plant is a root, and that would be madder root. So let's just get into that kit and start working with the beautiful natural dye plants from the Color Farm. So madder root is something we've looked at here at Color Quest in the past, and if you recall, it is quite a diverse natural color source. The madder plant root is where we pull the color from, and it is a dye source that has been used for centuries. It really is one of the ancient dye matters that can bring about beautiful reds and oranges in our dye pot. So go back and check out some of those videos if you'd like to see more ways in which you can use madder root. Today we're going to follow the kit's instructions, but we're also going to play around a bit with some of the exhaust flowers from our last two kits, and that would be marigold and sulfur cosmos. I'd like to see if we can't mimic this incredible confetti yarn that a wonderful artist from the month of October made for that CSA kit. So let's look at what she made and see if we can't do something similar. So here's the last box of the 2022 season at the Color Farm, and this one is really cool. So the October box looked at an artist who I've met and adore. Both her work and just her spirit is wonderful. Her name is Atenas Morales, and she owns a local shop here that is called Scarabajo Botanical, and definitely worth going to check out her work. She makes incredible botanical prints, and she has all kinds of different accessories and beautiful shawls and things that she makes herself and sells. She's really fantastic and just a very sweet person. She was the artist of this month, and she did something super cool. She took the Black Knight scabiosa that we looked at from the farm 2 years ago in a kit where we dyed a silk scarf, and she included cosmos, which we looked at last week in the box in September where we had cosmos flowers from the farm, and she did this incredible mixed combination, I guess what I would call confetti style yarn, where she took those two flowers and look at what she did. So you can see the orange of cosmos, and then that beautiful sort of green blue that comes from the Black Knight scabiosa. And I mean, look at that. Isn't that gorgeous? So I have this beautiful skein of wool yarn, and then here is the skein of yarn that's included. And this month they gave us an ancient dye source, and that is madder root. And this root has been ground to a fine, almost dust powder. So in order to use this, they have also included some cheesecloth, because as you can imagine, these bits would get into our wool yarn pretty easily. So they have provided this piece of netting that we can use to strain out or keep the pieces from going into the wool. And of course, we have our alum, which we'll use to mordant the fiber. They have included, as they did last time, the tags that will let us know what we're looking at. This is the one that Atenas dyed for us, and then another tag that we can put on that says madder root. And that is what we're going to work on today. And of course, they have the instructions, which you would recognize from the last 2 weeks, where the scouring and mordant process are going to be similar, but the dyeing is going to be a little bit different, because they're going to show us how we can work with something as fine as madder root that's ground using a netting in order to keep the particles out of the dye itself. So what I'd like to do, however, is work with some of the flowers that we had from the last 2 weeks. That would be the cosmos, which I kept the remnants of, as well as the marigold. And I'm going to be seeing if I can make something similar to what Atenas did with these, and include some madder as well. So see if we can't make a confetti piece, which means I'm going to take this skein of wool and I'm going to be separating it out, so I have 2 skeins of wools, so that I can try both of these processes with you today. All right, I've made my second skein, my smaller skein. It is about 10 grams, and that is what I'm going to use for just the straight madder dye bath. While this is scouring, typically I would be looking at the next step, which is the mordanting process. But when we're using madder, we're actually going to have to go to the dye section first, because we are going to be soaking the bundle of the madder root overnight, just to loosen it up. It is wood because it's a root, and so you want to always soak madder when you're going to be using it as a dye bath. I'll get that going now, because I am going to have to wait overnight for that to get a good soak. Now, per the instructions, they've given us this piece of cheesecloth. I often now am using a nut milk bag for this kind of event. I find that the mesh here obviously is finer than cheesecloth, but if you don't have a nut milk bag to do this process, no problem. You've got this wonderful piece of cheesecloth. So we'll work with cheesecloth since that's what came in the kit. I think I will double it up so that we have just that much more strength around it with not so many holes in here. bundle. Let's get it soaking. It's going to take a little while before it sinks because of the oxygen that's in there, but it will eventually sink down. You can also put a weight on top if you want. Let's look at the mordant section. The mordant's going to be with aluminum acetate. It's a little bit more fine than aluminum potassium sulfate, which is what we've used for the last two kits. That looks a little bit more like a fine powder instead of a salt, so you'll see that when we make it. We're going to be dissolving it into hot water. Again, I'll just heat some in the microwave. I'm going to go ahead and do that while our fiber is in the scour pot and have that nice and dissolved before we start the mordant process. That's going to be simply setting it into a pot with the dissolved mordant, heating it to no higher than 160, so just below a simmer. And we'll do that for about an hour, and then we'll take it off the heat and we're going to let it cool. Since I'm going to be having this soaking overnight anyway, I'll probably put it on the stove for about an hour and then just let it sit overnight in the aluminum acetate. That just gives it that much more binding power. So this has soaked overnight. You can see that it's already started to let off some of its dye, and this is now nice and soft, and we'll get that dye pot going so we can put the skein in and then work on our confetti design. One important thing to point out for this matter is that they want to make sure that we are not boiling it. Madder is particularly sensitive to heat, and if you overheat it, it can turn the dye brown. So I'm going to be keeping this at a very low simmer. Okay, while the small skein of wool is sitting in the madder dye pot, now it's time to work on the confetti design. I'm really excited to try this out. I did have a video here where I worked on something similar with food waste and some wool yarn. And now I'm excited to do it with some of these more traditional dye plants. I've got my exhaust cosmos and marigold from the last two boxes, and some of the madder root here. And so we're going to start working on this bundled process, and we're going to be using steam. Because these are quite strong dye sources and will most likely provide their color pretty quickly, we're going to use steam as our heat source in order to try to get that more spotted confetti effect, as opposed to more of a blended effect. We'll see if we can achieve that. It probably means it won't be in the steam for very long. We'll put it in for maybe 10 or 15 minutes once we've created the bundle, and then check it and see if we like the results. We can always put it back into the steam bath, but we do not want to submerge it in water. Otherwise we'll get more of a pure watercolor effect, which can be quite pretty. Up to you, but I want to see if I can achieve something similar to what a tennis did in the CSA box. Now, since we're going to be using a bundle, we're going to need a cloth to bundle it in. You could use any cloth that you want. I am actually going to be using one of these larger cotton pieces that I have. This particular piece was pre-treated in soy milk, and I figured if I'm going to be doing a bundle, I might like to see if I get a ghost print. So I'm going to use a finished piece of fiber, but you are more than welcome to use any scrap that you want. Just, I don't know, you might have a little surprise extra if you use something that's finished. So I'm going to stretch this out onto my surface, and I'm going to start by placing the dye material, some of it, down onto this cloth. So let's do that first. Now I'm going to work just on half, because after I lay this down and I put the fiber on, I'm going to be folding this over so that I can make my bundle and keep the yarn nice and tight inside of this. Here's my 3 dye plants. Here's the madder from this week's box. We have the marigold from 2 weeks ago. This is the leftovers. You can always keep these and use them for exhaust purposes, and in this I'm hoping they're going to bring about some more, because these are powerful dye plants. And then here is the remnants of the exhaust cosmos. So I'm going to be simply doing a scattered effect and see how this works. All right, it's bundled up and ready to go into the steam bath. I have to say, I was laughing to myself while I was working on that, because we so carefully placed the madder root into that mesh piece to avoid it from intermingling and getting stuck in the fibers of the wool yarn. This process, however, that I am winging it on is going to require quite a bit of washing in order to remove all of those bits. I'll be able to potentially let it dry with those bits still in there and then shake it out so that I can get rid of it. But it is going to be a labor of love in order to remove all of those little fragments of flowers and madder root. Oh well, all in the name of natural color. Here are the results. How much fun is this? So this is the small skein of pure madder. And madder is a very warm orangey red. It is pH sensitive, so you can do some shifting. I didn't this time. And I also left it in for overnight. It takes a little bit of time to work with madder. You need to have it soak overnight to get it going, and then it really gets richer the longer it can stay in the bath. I heated it for about an hour and then let it cool and sit overnight. So it was in that dye for about 24 hours. Now, this is how the confetti piece turned out using the exhaust bits from the marigold and cosmos as well as the madder root. So we got that nice confetti look to it. I'm really happy with that actually. And then this is the piece of cotton that it was bundled in. So you see I did get a print on this one as well. It's very simple but pretty, and why not get a little extra bonus print while you're working on something else. Now this was the confetti yarn that came with the kit that was dyed with cosmos and scabiosa. Look at how pretty that is. And I think I did a pretty good mimic job. Not too bad. This fiber is still a little bit damp, so it'll fluff up, but there you have it. Thank you so much, Color Farm. Okay, I want you to check something out. Look at this rainbow. By using all of the materials in the boxes, we got a sample of one of every color in the dyer's rainbow. So many more combos that could be made, but this is a pretty good cross section thanks to 8 different dye plants and their wonderful combinations. A rainbow. Color from nature is amazing. All we're missing is purple, but you know, that can be easily had with something like logwood. So thank you, nature, for providing so much incredible color. So there you have it, 4 CSA boxes filled with all kinds of incredible dye plants from the Color Farm. I'd like to send a huge thank you to Amy and Max, who I had 2 wonderful years working with in their incredible Color Farm. I want to wish them the best of luck in their future adventures, and I'm sure they're going to be quite colorful. So next week on Color Quest, guess what? Spring is just around the corner here in this part of the world. And guess who's coming to town? The Easter Bunny. It is time to see what magic we may be able to make with something I love to do in my childhood and in my adulthood, and that is color Easter eggs. Let's see what nature will provide in the way of something unique this year. It never fails to surprise me. Have a wonderful week, and I cannot wait to see you next Friday here on Color Quest. Wool skein dyed in dyer's chamomile, which we